The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be a world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
Ian Cairns on the lineup. Thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. We've been dancing around this for a little while, and I'm kind of scared because I might say something a little bit politically incorrect, and then I'll be banned forever.
Well, we haven't banned anyone from this podcast yet, and speaking your mind is kind of your brand over the course of 50 years, I think. So you're good to go.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, how are you doing today? Where are you today, and who are you with?
I'm doing very well. I live in Laguna Beach. We started the day off, Alyssa and I, with a surf down at Thalia Street. Small, offshore, couple of people out. But, when you start the day with a couple of decent waves, the day's going to be a good one.
Oh, even if it's just scratching the itch, right? And I think about it all the time with the amount of energy that gets consumed if I don't do it, thinking about I wonder what that sandbar's doing, and I wonder what the tide's doing, and I wonder what the wind's doing, as opposed to what, I have a window, I'm going to go surf, and then I feel so much better about my day.
Yeah, there's so much information about you can get paralysis.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just sort of, it's light. It's not blowing a gale. Put the gear on and go for a surf. And that kind of works. It's very untechnical and old-fashioned, but it's kind of like the life that works for us. And with Alyssa surfing, she was on the world tour for years. Mm-hmm. It's that one time where we get to do something together that's really important to us.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. And when you and I were getting this conversation organized, we joked about dancing around it. But you mentioned the other day when we were texting, we're going to have to cover 50 years in 60 minutes, which isn't wrong. But rather than kind of a cursory review of 50 years, I thought what we could do is go deep on a few topics and save some more for another time, which is my way of saying we can bring you back for more episodes. Does that sound good to you?
Oh, totally. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. There's, I'm kind of interested whatever happened to the founders concept.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, because, getting all of us together at the ranch, I thought was the start of something kind of cool because we felt involved with WSL. And then it just sort of fell by the wayside.
It did, and it was one of those things too that it was so much it fell by the wayside, it just sort of atrophied while all the other stuff was happening. But yes, one of the things that we had stood up was who are the founders of the sport, and you were obviously included in the original group alongside Fred Hemmings and Randy Rarick and Mark Richards and Wayne Bartholomew and Sean Thompson. And then that got expanded to include Margot Oberg and Lynn Boyer and Debbie Beecham. And you're absolutely right. The idea was that this was going to be a forward-facing group on occasion. It was going to be an exposure kind of group on occasion. And it was, most importantly to me, going to be a group that we could then tap for insight and consult and perspective, which has not happened. I think part of that was, a couple of things. I think the leadership changes inside the building, which are pretty well documented outside the building, is one thing. And then COVID and the radical changes we've kind of had to make to adjust to that. I do think that group is still, in my opinion, kind of ratified inside the organization. And I would like to think that it comes back, because I think those conversations that we never even got to have as a group are really, really essential to what we want to do.
Yeah, that was interesting. And there's a little, Sophie Goldschmidt was newly taking on the role of CEO. Mm. And so we're at the founders thing, and she briefly dropped in for a lunch. It wasn't like scheduled, but we were all having lunch, and she dropped in and said hi. And 4:00 the next morning, I kind of had this, I just had so much that I wanted to say. So I wrote an email and I sent it to Sophie and all the founders, and Sean just got shocked. This is so disrespectful what you said. And I just said to him, listen, Sean, the reason that the ASP succeeded was because there were so many different people with different personalities and different ideas, but we all had a single goal and a dream, and that was to make pro surfing happen. And my role is to tell the truth in its unvarnished form, no matter how catastrophic the reaction might be. And your job, Sean, is to be the diplomat and smooth it over and make everything okay. But the elephant in the room gets exposed and you get to talk about it. And, in essence, that's why it succeeded, because we had this group of people that we all got on really great, but we have these, different personalities. And it's the sort of thing that I'd like to see happen with the founders group with WSL.
I totally agree. And what that reminds me of is kind of the writer, Aaron Sorkin, who did, West Wing and a number of other things. He said something once that made a lot of sense to me, where he said, the best work I've ever done was to get the smartest people I could find who disagreed with each other and get them in the same place. Because I think you're right. It's like that kind of friction, especially with people who are passionate and people that have that insight and perspective. They might dislike each other in the room, but the output's going to be kind of the best version that happens. And so I'm with you. And I think kind of on the other side of the pandemic, which it feels like we're emerging and it feels like we're pushing towards a place of stabilization, which is a lot of what I have to do in my day job. It feels like that's the right time to do it, because we're going to need that insight to kind of sharpen as we move along. And more importantly to me, which is kind of where, I guess I take some responsibility, take most of the responsibility for the concept of the founders and why it was birthed and also why it atrophied, was that to me, it's hyper important that we connect our heritage to where we're moving in the future. And nowhere is that more important to me, which is where it came up during that event, was it something like the Surf Ranch, which under the worst circumstances kind of represents a dystopic future for surfing. But again, balanced with that right amount of insight and heritage and people from inside the building and outside the building, stands the best chance to succeed. That's kind of where my head's at on it.
Yeah. If you don't entertain lots of different variety of ideas, you don't discover the diamond in the rough. And so it's that sort of idea of bouncing ideas backwards and forwards. And there's so much history. So many things have been tried and they've failed, and they've failed for different reasons. And we've all had time to reflect on that. I'm a complete believer in the concept of, the devil's advocate, throwing up ideas that perhaps are discordant with the direction or the group. It doesn't necessarily mean that deep down I don't really believe in the mission. I mean, I absolutely believe in the mission. It's been my life's work to help pro surfing happen. But can it happen in the best possible way for everyone in surfing? And those are sort of big issues and questions that need to be addressed if you want to succeed in the long term.
Well, totally. And I think a big part of that too, right? Because we're in our fifth decade, so 45-ish years, right, since 76, has been having to contend with the artificiality of the markets outside the WSL and inside the ASP, IPS, and WSL, and kind of what that's wrought. And by that, I mean, okay, if now we're going to be very responsible and say, this is what a stabilized sport looks like, this is what programmability looks like, this is what profitability looks like, and profitability in service of re-injecting that investment back into the sport, then yeah, there's going to be things that are changing from what it was. Because what it was, especially when I started, was really a sort of an arms race, right? There wasn't really any accountability on profit. It was, what's that event doing? We're going to do that plus this. What's that event doing? We're going to do that plus this. And it's not so much irresponsible, but that just was the mentality at the time. And a lot of good things came out of that, but also a lot of, not so much dishonesty, but just there wasn't a lot of honest accountability for like, well, that was not sustainable because of X, Y, and Z. And now we're having to contend with that. But I do like where we're heading in a lot of ways, both from a calendar standpoint and also from a, transformation standpoint of what we're going to be doing. While we're on the topic, because I got you here and I'm happy that you're here, I want to get your, as you put them, unvarnished thoughts on probably the most radical change, which is how we determine the world champ with the WSL finals.
I got asked this question when I was on the live broadcast. And I answered the question by saying in 1973, I won the Smirnoff, a single event, which was considered the world championship in those days. And so a single event was kind of judged not to be the right way to do it. So thereby the formation of the IPS and world champions being selected by points over multiple events over a season. And so it's really just a question of the, it's what's right or wrong, who knows? It kind of worked for me, but does it work for the tour today? And that should be a question that gets discussed. That it's at lower trestles and the WSL comes back to lower trestles is extraordinarily positive. That WSL comes back to California is huge because the industry, the fan base, there are so many positive things. And the concept that kids can come with their mum and dad down to the beach and see these guys in action in a high-performance wave like lowers and then get a wave on the side. It's that collegial sort of family atmosphere that I think really lends a lot of depth and value to the tour because you get this really direct connection for kids, for fans, for customers of the products that the surfers wear. All of these things all get satisfied in that kind of environment. And it's, because of trestles being so cool, it's almost like a little bit of a country fair down there. And so it's very different to what happens at Huntington Beach. But in essence, both of them, and I started the OP Pro at Huntington Beach, and the intention was to bring the surfers to the people, so that the people who were the fans could actually get to see and touch them and to get autographs. And it really personalizes everything. And it's a really, really important concept that's kind of fairly unique to surfing in big sports, that there's this direct interaction between the fans and the surfers. And that's a really positive thing because it brings the surfers down to the fan level, which is always good. And it's like a gift to those people. Thank you for being supporters of what we do. And that, to me, that gift of what we do back to the people who are our supporters, I think is a really, really valuable concept. And it's why I still support the concept of city events.
Sure.
And you look at Rio. I mean, you shifted from downtown Rio, but you're still in Rio State. And you go to Saquarema where the waves are kind of good. But that interaction between the Brazilian fans and all of the surfers is just spectacular and amazingly positive.
Well, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, there's no parallel in terms of accessibility. You couldn't go onto the NBA court and shoot free throws with LeBron James before a game, but you could go paddle out with Kelly Slater before a heat if you wanted. Well,
in those days, you could be out there with Tom Curran, and then you could be chest deep when he's won the OP Pro coming in, and Mr. T, a big black security guy, is pushing people away and protecting Tom. But the concept that Tom would ever need protection from these people is alien because they were just so stoked
to
actually be so close and to maybe touch him on the shoulder or something. There's a very special relationship between high-level surfers and the run-of-the-mill surfers, and there's also the idea when you bring those guys to the waves that we surf every day, and then you compare what they're doing on those waves versus what happens out at Lowers or at Huntington Beach on any day, it's just mind-boggling spectacular. And that right there is, one of the gifts of what the tour brings to the regular surfers. But it's also just an illustration of how incredible they are.
I always felt like that was a huge part of Dane Reynolds' success, was his and appeal was he would put videos out of him falling or him surfing everyday conditions. Yeah. And people are like, holy shit, I didn't know you could do that. I surf those waves every day. As opposed to what the paradigm was before, which was hyper polished, perfect waves, Indonesia, et cetera, et cetera. And people are like, yeah, that's nice, but it's not what I deal with every day.
Well, there's really a lot of room for that. And if you look at Cloudbreak and Teahupoo and then, Grajigan when it was going to happen, look at what that did to surfers from a beach break background. Whether it's Kelly Slater or whether it's Adriana de Souza or the rest of the Brazilians, Medina, it forced those guys to raise their game into a league that was just absolutely amazing. We actually just saw Felipe do it at Margaret River.
Sure, yeah.
Where he took the lines that John had created, which were sort of like inventive behind the peak, giving time to come up into the pocket with a huge power hack. But then he jams that sort of crazy, techno jam in the middle of the wave. And I just went, oh my God, he's changed the paradigm again. He's just done for Margaret River what John had already done. He'd established this as a wave you could surf well on. Yeah. And then Felipe's creativity, raised the bar again. And that to me, because I'm a fan of Margaret River, of course, I was just totally stoked to see that. And I was especially stoked to see it for Felipe.
Of course.
Because it put him back on the map when he'd been under the thumb of the Italoa and Medina machine. All of a sudden, he comes back and stands and puts his hand up and just go, hey, guys, I'm back.
Yeah.
Watch what I do. And then Trestles with Felipe. Hello.
Of course. Circling back to that concept of the WSL finals, because this is something that I always think is interesting. So this has been an idea that's been kicking around for a few years. And initially I was not a fan because I was concerned about the legitimacy of basically, well, if we do it this way, is it the same as, the world champs of yesteryear, your Lisa Andersons and your Andy Irons, et cetera. And we had this meeting during the Fiji event several years ago with the world champs, and with a number of other sort of world title contenders. And we kind of pitched this idea. And I was blown away because to a person, they all said, yeah, this is really cool. And their argument was, look, a lot of them had won world titles. They're like, I won the world title like in my house or in my locker room. And the guy behind me or the girl behind me, they lost to, a lower seed or a wild card, and that was it. And they said, I want to win in the water, and I want to beat the next person, and I want to do it at a world-class wave. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting from a psychological perspective that you want to challenge yourself like that. John in particular was pretty vocal about this. And then it happened sort of coincidentally with Italo beating Gabriel in the final heat of the year in the 2019 season. And that really sealed it for a lot of them because they'd said, I want that. I want to win on the day and I want to beat the best surfers. And I said, okay, hey, look, if you guys are good with the legitimacy part, who am I to say? And I'm actually really looking forward to it. I think you're right. We're going to have to kind of see how it plays out, but I think it'll be interesting.
Well, there's another key element. And when I started the ASP, part of the deal with Graham Cassidy was that the tour would end in Australia. And so therefore the tour didn't end in Hawaii. And with respect to the word legitimacy, you cannot go past Sunset Beach, Haleiwa, Pipeline, and Waimea in terms of historical and future legitimacy. So I've always held the opinion, like it was in my day, that those Haleiwa, Sunset Beach, and Pipeline should have been CT events all along.
Mm-hmm.
And they should have always been the option on some massive day to go to Waimea.
Mm.
Because let me say, you discover some pretty interesting things when you take the World Tour surfers and you put them out at Waimea. And, so suddenly there's a lot of people they don't want to take off. And historically, it's been people that didn't want to go out.
Sure.
And so if you want to establish legitimacy amongst the world of surfing, John winning the Eddie completely cemented his position in the terms of legitimacy for his surfing in the world forever. Because for him, that was just another day out in Hawaii. And in fact, his comment was that the waves really looked like Jeffreys Bay. And suddenly I'm thinking to myself, I can see the texture on the face and the angle that you need to knife into the wave. And regardless of how big it was, his skill at putting the edge in and driving down the face and cutting across, I could just see, I could see that. And so the concept that you're never going to get that in California, the only place you're ever going to get these guys tested in the ultimate situation is in Hawaii. I mean, yes, you're going to have those rare days at Chopu and also at Cloudbreak that are just, mind-boggling, but there are so many other ordinary days, whereas in Hawaii, so there's going to be a question to be answered whether it's going to be a satisfactory end to the tour being at Lower Trestles versus being at Pipeline.
Sure. I do like the idea of if that rotating venue for the finals is moving around to high performance wave like Lowers, and we won't name the other ones. I still like the idea of the tour starting at Pipe and finishing at Chopu. I think that's a really strong statement. On the topic of determining the world's best comprehensive surfers, right now we've got 10 events. They get to keep their best 8 results out of 10. How do you feel about throwaway events? Because the argument I would use is that there are probably places to hide for the men and women on tour if they're not a beach break specialist or a point break specialist or a barrel specialist right now with the throwaway events. And moving to a system where we have a singular venue determining the world champ on one day, do you think throwaway events have a place in the future of the CT?
Well, I came second to PT in 1976, and there were no throwaways. So I would go for throwaways for sure, because I had some bad results and I had 2 wins. So
where were your bad results?
Everywhere but Haleiwa and I came second at Bells, and I won the Alanoke on Phillip Island and in pretty good reef break waves. My weaknesses were beach breaks. Mm-hmm. Because we just didn't surf beach breaks when I was a kid. And so I like the idea of throwaways because everyone has a bit of a brain fart. Everyone has a particular heat they'd like to never see again. I mean, Gabriel Medina at Margaret River is a heat that he will never want to ever see again. And so it just happens, and being able to sort of X out something like that and then get your head back on and then go and get down to business is kind of really cool.
Well, let's get into. I do want to get into your background, but first, because you are such a keen observer of professional surfing and one of Western Australia's finest exports, I did want to pick your brain a bit about the Championship Tour event heading into Rottnest Island. And we've had our first 4 events. We've had Maui and then Maui Pipe for the women, Newcastle, Narrabeen, and Margaret River. You mentioned Felipe as being really, really impressive. Have there been other standout men and women surfers for you across these first 4 events?
I was super stoked to see Sibilik do well. I just love the idea of the underdog. and that he did well. I was kind of disappointed that he didn't carry that forward into main break. I was really, really disappointed that first and foremost, hats off. It's miraculous that WSL was able to pull those 4 events off in Australia, coming up to Rottnest.
Yeah.
And so that's, Starkey did an amazing job. I've got to say that my friends at Surfing New South Wales did an incredible job with boots on the ground and helping out. And then, of course, my really good friends in Surfing WA, just priceless support team for the WSL.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that Jason Majek's never got to finish off down in Margaret River. He's setting up at Strickland Bay.
Sure.
And, I surfed Strickland Bay quite a few times, and it was quite a trek back in the day because you'd get on the ferry and you go over there and you had to rent a bike. And so and then it was like 3 p.m., I think, when the last ferry would leave. All right. So, you have to time your surf session. And this one day I was out there with Charles Morton Stewart, Chuck Stewart, rest in peace, a friend of mine, Journo, and we're out at Strickland, and it was like 6 or 7 feet offshore, just perfect. And that, the rights and the long lefts. And I go, all right, so I know how, if I really sprint on my bike, I know how, I can just ditch it on the wharf and jump on the ferry, right? So I, surf up to the last second, and I come in and I've got a flat tire. So I had to run the bike up the hill, and I had to ride it down the hill on the flat tire, on the rim. And I just made it. Like the ferry was pulling away, and I, threw the bike down and dove on the ferry and got out of there. And that was kind of like a normal trip to Rottnest.
Right.
For someone in Perth, right? It was just sort of, and there are so many other good waves out there. The fact that it's sort of similar to Catalina in terms of, close to but there's a really big difference. Catalina goes north-south.
Right.
But Rottnest goes east-west.
Uh-huh.
So that, what you see there in Strickland's like halfway out on the southern coast. But if you go all the way out to the end of Rottnest, like West End, there's some big waves, deep water, and big fish.
Well, tell us a fish story. Have you ever seen any out there? And if so, what was the scariest one for you?
No, I've never. Back in my day, the concept of a white shark was a massive novelty because they we knew they were far out in the deep water, but they were never close. There'd be bronze whalers and wobbegongs and all sorts of stuff like that in close, but the idea of there being big sharks didn't happen until they protected them. I did have a surf up at Red Bluff, way up north, 1,000 miles north of Surfworth. I was with Pat. Left-hand point break, amazing, 6 feet, offshore wind, perfect. And just Pat and I there and a fisherman. The fisherman caught one fish, filled his freezer and left. So it's there surfing by myself. And I'm surfing out there by myself, and there's like 100 sharks out behind the lineup. Black-tip sharks everywhere, chasing me, the whole thing. And so in 3 days, I paddled out 3 times, caught like one wave each time. And I was just praying for someone to come.
Yeah.
One other guy, like Pruden, turn up, please. Because now the odds are 50%.
Yeah, of course. Right?
And when the waves are that good, 50% odds are pretty good. And, probably you're the one that's going to get eaten. And I would go, drive the 100 miles back to Carnarvon and report that you'd been eaten by a shark.
Sure.
But at least I would have had a really good surf session. And that's growing up in Western Australia, you have all of these stories about just being in the wilderness.
Sure.
And about just surfing by yourself. I mean, I used to surf Margaret River by myself all the time, and people, you had no leashes, so your board just washes in. You swim out in the channel to chase it. I've been out there at times. You see the photos of the dolphins where I'm out there by myself, and like a pod of dolphins come, and they're riding waves, and they would not let me take off. I would paddle for a wave, and a dolphin in the wave would come up underneath me and stop me from taking off. Because it was their time. They were going to have a session out there. And then next thing you know, they're gone. And, so these are sort of like my experiences growing up as a kid in Western Australia. I always had to ask people to go surfing with me, because, I didn't want to surf by myself. But it was just really a magical place and a magical time. So, like, I got a lot of love for Western Australia. I mean, it's an amazing place to grow up as a surfer.
And when you grew up there, let's go there. Now, did you lived in Perth, and is that where you guys stayed most of the time? And you would drive down to Margaret River? How did that work?
Yeah, I lived in. My dad got a job up north in the iron ore mines, so we drove across the Nullarbor in 1966. My brother and sister, my mum and dad, 1,200 miles of dirt road. I mean, not just dirt road, like track. And, it's a big experience. But my dad had rented us a place in 5 houses from the beach in Cottesloe. Mm-hmm. And, so I grew up at Isolated, which is like this little reef break, which is sort of somewhat like Thalia Street here in Laguna. And, so when I paddle out here, I kind of flash on Isolated, right? And Margaret River is 200 miles south. So that year I went down, a friend from the beach just took me down, and I went to, I literally saw North Point, just like Quirramatta Bay. And the difference between the surf in Perth and the surf down south is just so crazy different. I mean, you go from Laguna Beach to the North Shore of Oahu in a 3-hour drive. And so all of these reefs, I surfed lots of state championships at Yallingup, and then they moved them. The Australian titles in 1969 at Margaret River was like a milestone event because it put Margaret River and Western Australia on the map. Big, powerful waves, days and days of just 10-foot surf. And, the number of different surf breaks that there are around down that area, I mean, it's kind of spectacular. So I went to high school. My first wife, Pat, came from Busselton. So we lived in Busselton for quite a while, which is sort of on the north end, like the Yallingup end. That's Busselton Shire. And then we had a farm at Metricup, which is sort of like directly inland from Quirramatta Bay. And
what did you guys grow on the farm?
Well, the concept of the farm, like I'm a believer in food security, right? That's going to be the big issue that we all have to face. Climate might get hot and cold, but food security, as the population grows, there's not enough calories to feed everyone. And so having a farm and growing your own food, we had cattle, but it was actually a vineyard. We planted a vineyard. And so I cleared it, dug the roots, bonfires, planted. We worked at Cullen Winery. You've probably eaten there.
Oh, yeah.
Pruning. Pat went to school with the Cullens. Dr. Cullen was our family doctor.
Oh, wow.
So we were part of the whole community. And so we had we cut the vines, we planted them, 16,000 vines. And then that summer, it was a super hot summer, there was a grasshopper plague, and it ate every vine. And so that was 1990. In 91, I came here in January to California, and my life changed.
Sure.
So that's a pretty significant time. But fortunately, Pat and my older kids still own that farm.
Okay.
Every time I go there, I drive by on the dirt road, and it's kind of like a throwback to old Western Australia. It's country. If someone drives by you, we get up to see who goes by. Oh, that's Ned on the corner, right? And so now all around it is vineyards.
Right.
And it's sort of growing up in that the 30 years, but it's such an amazing experience to live on a farm. My mum grew up on a dairy farm in northern New South Wales. My first wife, Pat, grew up on a dairy farm inland from Busselton. The idea of being on the land and growing your own food is kind of like a spectacular idea in my mind.
Yeah. Going back to talking about, well, look, in a 3-hour drive, you can go from surfing essentially Laguna Beach sized waves to the North Shore sized waves. What drove you as a surfer to want to surf bigger waves? Was it competition propelled? Was it you were a big guy and you just needed some more oomph? Like, did you have friends that pulled you out there when you started going to Margaret River? I'm curious because it is almost kind of, and not almost, it is essentially two different sports, right? When you're getting into those two different kind of conditions. And I'm curious what drove you to seek out bigger waves?
Well, I was in the Southern Surf Riders Surf Club, and we would go away on the weekends, and then the club would go down. We had a shack in Preverly Park, in the campground areas where we could come and stay for free. So it was just sort of bunk beds and stuff, and so we had a place to go. And all the competitions were originally in Yellingup, and Yellingup is pretty much a pretty funky wave. In summertime, it's kind of flat and mushy left, but in wintertime, when you get more of a southwest swell, it's like Sunset Beach. It's this big outside peak, just like Sunset. And of course, Taj is surfing Rabbit Hill right on the inside, the shore break there, which is like mind-boggling barrels. But when I first went down to Margaret River is much more powerful. It's much bigger. It's much more raw than Yellingup. And my surfing had developed to where I just wanted to surf bigger, more powerful waves, more testing. And you remember that we would read magazines. Like, there was no videos. There was an occasional surf movie in Perth. There was no internet. There was no nothing. A surf magazine, and you would read these stories about all these iconic Hawaiian surfers like Ben Iper and Eddie Aikau and Jock Sutherland, and all of these things would fill your imagination. So one of the things that happens when you read a magazine, and that's all your information, is you've got to use your imagination. You've got to imagine, like, how good were these guys? What were they doing? How all of this thing. And so my imagination and my dreams were somewhat bigger than reality, because I kept on driving myself and to, just get better, to be as good as what they were, the photos I would see. And when I got to Hawaii in 1972, and first day I was out at Velzy Land in the morning, and that afternoon sunset started to break. The swell came up like out of nowhere, and I just remember it was like something that's 10 to 12 foot Sunset Beach, and I'm out in the middle of all of this stuff, and I'm just going, wow, this is just like Margaret River, but bigger and better. And so it was what is the ceiling? What ceiling do you have as a person? Where do you just go, well, I don't know. I'm kind of reaching it. But I had the opportunity to surf Waimea, and I was out there and I going, wow, this is kind of cool. But I was out there with Jose Angel. And so I'm just fresh out there. Jose Angel was out there, just a great big wave surfer. And he misses a wave and he gets caught inside by a set. So he gets off, he doesn't bail his board. He just gets the tail block and he pushes the board through the pitching peak for like 5 waves. And I'm out there just watching this, like, mind boggled. So all of a sudden the bar has been lifted higher. And I'm just going, wow, if I want to be someone, I have to be able to do that. I have to have that confidence in my ability as a waterman. I have to, push myself more. How can I get up to this level of Eddie and Clyde and Barry Kanapuni and, Jeff Hackman, who's winning the big events? And how do you do this? And all you do is now you're amongst them and you see, man, I need to, you got to look in the mirror and just go, dude, you need to raise your game. And, so all of a sudden, we were out there and, me and PT they used to call Sunset Beach, which was the epicenter of surfing in those days. On Aussie day was the day when it was onshore and the channel was closing out and no one in the right mind would be out there, but we would go out. And so when you don't have a leash and you're in conditions like that, you pretty soon figure out, whether you have what it takes. Obviously, I was able to get to the beach, so I kind of survived. But there were many, many days where it was just really, really dramatically challenging. And, so again, the ceiling kept on raising.
But I was gonna say, it's interesting because it feels like your motivation was driven by an idea, because there really wasn't professional surfing, right? It was this idea that had crystallized in your head, reading those magazines about these characters and the reverence you felt for those characters and wanting to test yourself. And I don't want to get too poetic, but it's much bigger than sort of a financial motivation or professional motivation. And I'm wondering if that was the case, or if I'm reading that right, because there really wasn't professional surfing at this time. It was almost you going there and saying, well, no, I'm measuring myself against the idea of Jose Angel.
Well, when you think of, I read historical fiction. I read, I lamented the idea that everything was discovered. I show you books of, explorers when I was 9 and 10 years old, I was reading books about explorers in New Guinea looking for headhunters, and a guy killing man-eating tigers and stuff. Like, my favorite books are on my bookshelf right now, and I can bring them down and read them again. And so I realized that with Hawaii and this journey, there was an adventure to be had. There was, I really wasn't good enough yet. And the other concept that's really important is that Duke Kahanamoku brought surfing to Australia at Freshwater Beach. And I remember I was at the north, the north end of Manly with Snowy McAllister. And Snowy McAllister was an old Aussie guy, a surfer for many, many years. He was there when Duke was there. And he just told me that you have to respect the heritage of Australian surfing, being the contribution that Duke made to Australian surfing. So in 1968, I was on the West Australian team at the Australian Championships, and I won the Most Emerging Junior Surfer Trophy, which was the Duke Kahanamoku Trophy. And I'm just going, whoa, like Snowy McAllister, the Duke Trophy, the whole thing. Can you imagine? Could you imagine getting in the Duke contest? Was in my head. Like, could I imagine getting in that? Because it was peer voted. And you had to go and prove yourself in Hawaii to actually get the votes. And, so in my second season, I got the votes. So 72 was my first win. 73, I wasn't in the Duke. In 74, I'm in the final and I come second to Larry Bertelman in closeout Sunset Beach. The kind of evolution of a person's thinking when you take these things one step at a time, and you're the evolution of perhaps a dream coming true. The idea that you can have dreams and they can come true is really my belief now. It's happened in my life. And so the concept that I could be in the Duke, so 74, I'm second. In 75, I win the Duke Championship to close out Waimea. It's sort of like, wow. And in my mind, I just went, this is for you, Duke. This is payback for everything you gave to us as Australians. In recognition of that gift, we're coming back and we're showing you that in terms of homage of what you've done for us, look at who we are. And that was, it was really, really important to me. Like, that was the highlight of my entire competitive career, was, winning the Duke, because the you've seen the opening ceremonies of the Eddie. It was just like that. You got blessed by Reverend Okaka. There was Hawaiian, the blessing was in Hawaiian. A very, very, very special event. You really felt the mana. And, so the connection to Hawaiian surfing is really important for Australia. It's really important for surfing.
And how old were you when you won the Duke?
It was 1975. I was 23.
And I was going to talk about that because it was just on the cusp of what I kind of consider, at least in sort of the international tours, prehistory, right? And more than one sort of esteemed surf journalist has written about this, that you were Australia's premier talent, in those years, in terms of surfing in Hawaii and winning national events in Australia. Because it was such a nascent period in professional surfing, was there any self-awareness on your part of like, I'm good. Like this is, even if it was before an international tour and before kind of the emergence of the profession of surfing, were you kind of aware that you were the forerunner from your country?
Well, I like the idea of being one among many. And yes, like if you put me in big right-handers, like I'm really good. But I knew my weakness was pipeline and going left. So, I like to think I'm kind of honored to think that I'm a peer of Rabbit, Mark Richards, Sean Thompson, that somehow I can be confident and stand with that group of people, Simon Anderson, and of course Jerry, and then the Hawaiians, Michael Ho, and also Eddie and Clyde. Or that rather than standing alone on the top of the podium, I like to be considered as part of that group. And that to me, for a kid reading those surfing magazines in Cottesloe, is, could you ever imagine being considered a peer of that group of people? Pretty mind-boggling.
Of course. I want to get into that a little bit and a couple other topics, but we're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. So we talked about before how, 76, and you mentioned this too, was the year that retroactively Peter Townend won the first world title with a ranking that looked back and kind of aggregated all the disparate events from the year and said, yep, as you pointed out, with no throwaways, PT wins the world title. What was it like for your involvement as a competitor, 76, 77, 78? You mentioned you had a couple of weak spots in your surfing. The tour was new. You felt, really positive to be regarded as one of that group. Did you have any like world title aspirations during that window? Did you have any professional goals, competitive goals, or I'm just curious what the mindset was at the time for you?
Well, first and foremost, the IPS, PT and I agitated Randy, and Randy agitated Fred Hemmings. And because we'd already formed the Association of Surfing Professionals, or the Australian group, the Australian Association. And we'd already done rankings, and PT and I, he had his little typewriter, and we would work on stuff. And because our vision was that, why don't we tie all these events together and make a tour? Because Formula One had a tour, other sports had a tour. We think we should do it in surfing. And so we agitated. And then what Fred did was he formed the IPS. And there's a really conceptual difference between sport in Australia and sport in America. Sport in Australia, the footy clubs and all this sort of stuff, they're owned by the members. Football clubs, they're community clubs. And we've just seen it in soccer, actually. where they tried to make a Super League, and all of the people just went, no way, man, Manchester United's my club.
Right.
Right. That's how we were brought up in Australia. So when Fred formed the IPS and he made it a private company, and him and a couple of his mates owned the sport, it didn't sit right with me. And that was part of the motivation for the ASP,
right?
Which happened in '83. But in those years, when you think about, like, I just come second in the world. The tour was happening. I felt like we contributed to make that happen. I did not have an ambition to continue on and go and win a world title because in 1977, we went off and did Big Wednesday. In 1976, second in the world, I was a number one money winner. I won $8,000. In 1977, working on Big Wednesday, I earned $50,000. And so now we're working in Hollywood, all this sort of stuff. And I became somewhat disillusioned with the concept of pro surfing because there were no sponsors. We had to borrow money to buy the ticket to travel. All of these people, my first ticket from Perth to California in 1972 for the Australian teams was $2,000. Now you can buy a ticket to Perth for $2,000. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course.
Like 50 years later.
Yeah.
And so the arithmetic didn't really work, and I largely achieved the things that were in my sphere of dreaming. And so I didn't do well for a couple of years, but I had the opportunity to come back twice. And I came back through a unique concept called the Pro Class Trials, where if you weren't ranked, you got to understand that when we first went to Hawaii, you couldn't get in those events. They were closed. There was 36 people, and if you were a nobody, you couldn't get in. So the concept of closed events and the opportunity of the Pro Class Trials giving someone who's not on the rankings a chance to get into events. You see the difference?
Yep. Yeah.
And so I got in 1978, I was not ranked, and I got in and I came second to Buzzy Kerbox in the World Cup. In 1980, I wasn't ranked, and I came, qualified in the Pro Class Trials, and I won the World Cup at Haleiwa. Right. So the idea that you have an open series that's not owned by someone these are sort of like structural issues that would be on my list of critique of pro surfing today. And so you roll it up, and when I surfed, my last year on the tour was 1981, and I came 20th. And I just hung it up because in my mind, Kanga wasn't 20th. Like if I'm not top three, I don't want to do this anymore. So that's 1981, 1982. I launched the OP Pro. I went, okay, well, what do I do now? And I started the OP Pro.
And were you living in California at this time?
Yeah, we'd moved because we were doing the bronzed Aussies and we had licensees. With the bronzed Aussies, we had licensees in Japan, Australia, and the United States. We had a surfboard licensee. We had a bronzed Aussie surf shop in Huntington Beach. We were getting money from licensees for clothing in Japan. It was really the forerunner of a global licensing business. And we got these ideas off Duke Boyd, who was doing Hang 10 and Lightning Bolt. We went, well, he's doing it and it's licensing. We could do that too. And we used our notoriety as competitors. We were team riders for the Bronze Aussies.
Sure.
Who would ever think that concept would work? It's literally the model that everyone uses today.
Absolutely. Going back to your role in the creation of the ASP, and for listeners, the IPS was sort of the global tour from 76 to 82, and in 83, the ASP became the global tour. But I've got this quote from an interview you gave to Surfing World, and if you'll indulge me, I just want to read it back to you because there's some gold in it. I had the rankings and PT had a typewriter. We were dangerous. We had information and the ability to disseminate it. There was some pretty wacky bullshit going on with pro surfing at the time, and the genesis of the pro tour happened in Australia in 1975. We had an Australian professional champion that year, and I believe I may have been me. 3 things were needed for successful change: a big idea, someone with gravitas, and the money. And we had all 3. When I started the ASP in 1982, membership cost $100. I sat on the Cronulla beach and fought every Mongol Australian who didn't want to pay it. Again, I was the Satan of pro surfing, as I'd already been cast with the bronzed Aussies, but they paid up and the tour became phenomenally successful. And I love that quote because there's a lot of gold in it, but also it's representative of really a hallmark in terms of when you have a vision, whether it is performative in the sense of your surfing ability or your business goals or just a vision for professional surfing, you see it through. And the saying is what, the dogs may bark, but the caravan keeps rolling. That feels like it rings pretty true with how you approach the formation of the ASP.
Well, Randy wasn't running the IPS.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff Luton from Australia was doing it. We put on the OP Pro and it was a massive success. But there were all these sorts of problems that Jeff Luton should have dealt with. I see the governing body as a service organization to help the events prosper and succeed. And they made it very difficult for us. So we'd already had some, Keone Downing did art and he created some stationery for ASP. So I went to the people at OP and said, will you support this association? And they gave us a 3-year commitment of $250,000 a year for 3 years to get the whole thing off the ground. And so I called up people around the world and I got Peter Beness on board from South Africa, Graham Cassidy, and they were like anchors for the formation of ASP. And then I went and physically visited with Fred Hemmings, and he committed to be on the tour.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had the tour, and it revolved around changing the structure of the tour to start and finish in Australia. And Graham Cassidy was instrumental in putting together those events. So all of a sudden, we've got this massive change that occurs, and before you know it, people from Jacques Hillet from Lacanau wants to bring the Lacanau Pro onto the tour. And I'd surfed twice at the Waimea 5000 in Brazil, in Rio, but there was no Brazilian event. So Alfio Lagnado from Hang Loose commits to doing the Hang Loose Pro and bringing Brazil onto the tour. So rather than just being South Africa, Australia, and Hawaii, before you know it, Europe's involved. Before you know it, Brazil's involved. And this is the genesis of the business of surfing in those areas. And it's also the genesis of dreams for European surfers and also for Brazilian surfers. Like, I can, through my pathway at home, I can make it onto the world tour. And so it was pretty interesting. In those days, there were guys that would run surf events and say they'd put up prize money, and then you'd win the event and there was no prize money. It was funky. So one of the rules of the ASP was, if you want to be on the schedule, you have to deposit the $25,000 prize money with ASP. And then you have to agree to international traveling judges. You have to agree to using the priority rule. You have to agree to computer scoring. All of these things got developed in those first couple of years of ASP. So with Brazil, Alfio goes, all right, I want to be there. So I flew down to Rio to pick up my 25 grand, because it was a little bit more more difficult to transfer money in those days. So I fly down there. We meet in Rio de Janeiro, and I'm with Flavio Boabaj, who ended up running ASP South America. And we meet at a bank, and the banks in those days, it was massive. The banks in those days in Brazil, because there was massive inflation. Inflation was like, I mean, crazy. And having US dollars was like gold. So we meet at the bank. There's a guy in some sort of pillbox inside with a machine gun to shoot bank robbers. The cars are parked 2 and 3 deep on the side of the road. And Flavio goes, no problem. Leave it out of gear and leave the handbrake off. People will move it around and whatever. So we go inside, and Alfio gives me $25,000 in cash in this paper bag. And I walk outside, and our car has been stolen. So I'm in downtown Rio de Janeiro in 1985 or 86, $25,000 in cash and no car. And that's what the ASP was like. Man, it was, just sticking, it was chewing gum and masking tape. It was stuck together. But there was so much, but the bottom line was prize money always got paid. Mm. The bottom line was that the judges, the concept of being a professional judge happened with Mike Martin. We had 3 of our traveling judges on the panel with the head judge. ASP's control of what the vision of what kind of surfing do you do to be an ASP champion happened because of that. It wasn't mishmash. It was controlled, like Jack Shipley and then his son. I mean, these are names. These are all people. So it was a collective. Fatty Al as the tour director. Al Hunt, Meg Bernardo we hired her out of high school, and she's running ASP North America today. 40 years later, if not more.
Nah, Meg hired me. She's going to be on the podcast next week.
Yeah, Meg. I mean, people that have given their lives to the success of, competitive surfing around the world. And there's this long, long list of people. So to me, ASP and now WSL means all of that. Mm-hmm. It's much more important, all of those people and the contributions they've made. It's kind of like working class vibe. And people that roll up their sleeves and will put the scaffolding up and blow the air horn and know how to tabulate when the computer goes down and all of these sorts of things. And there's a lot of unrecognized, hardworking people. And I know that G is slaving away out there somewhere, making sure shit happens for WSL. Sure. Like, started out as a judge. Mm-hmm. Became the interim executive director, became the director. Mm-hmm. Went off for a temporary career at Billabong, and then came back and is integral to making these events work. Mm-hmm. These are people that behind the scenes, nothing would happen without these people. Mm-hmm. And so when you have that nucleus of really important people, and then you've got the surfers who all, from just Groms, whether it's in Costa Rica or Australia or somewhere, that have this dream of doing what I did, rising to the top. There's this massive, groundswell of just amazing people doing incredible things that I don't feel get the kind of recognition they deserve.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you. And as you pointed out, like all those people, and I'll go back to kind of the story with the bank in Rio. There's a lot of unsung effort that goes into building the bones of a thing, right? Because that's what you guys were doing, was saying, okay, well, this didn't exist before, and creation is hard, and we're creating something that wasn't there before. And to this day, you're right, there are a ton of people that continue to work to make it happen. And I kind of go back to the stabilization point, which is I love professional surfing. I love competitive surfing because of what you've outlined. There is a kid somewhere that, if they're dedicated enough and talented enough, should have a mechanism to get to the highest level if they want to, right? And without it, right, because we can talk about judging and we can talk about X, Y, and Z, and there's all sorts of social media commentary about it. But at the end of the day, performing against the best surfers in the live arena is the highest level of meritocracy in surfing. Other than that, it's just hype. Yeah. If you can't deliver it in the heat of battle, is my opinion.
Well, so accidentally I got involved with stand-up paddling as a coach of the US team. And, we ended up winning a gold medal, but I met some really amazing people and my eyes got opened up because I realized that all of these people in these other sports, they think they're surfers. I genuinely believe, and I just go back to the kid on a surfboat plane in northern New South Wales, riding first, old Super 8 movie, me riding my first wave of a piece of whitewater. I believed I was a surfer, like I was Midget Farrelly, right? And so the idea that shortboard performance surfing is the only kind of surfing defies the concept of meritocracy. I mean, the stuff that the guys that really pioneered the box are the boogie boarders, and they transitioned to the right, and so they're inventing slab surfing. The aerials that are being done in the tour today were being done on the Murray Boogie Tour at Huntington Beach and the Bud Surf Tour by bodyboarders. So those guys are contributors. The guys that are, and we see it, living and breathing with Kai Lenny, the guy that comes from a sailboarding background, kite surfing, fundamentally invents foiling, although Laird did, but, popularizing it. And then the concept of, foil surfing, big wave surfing, toe-in big wave surfing, this whole concept of all of these different types of surfing and the spread of surfing, just the magical idea of riding the energy of a wave. It's being done in rivers, on little river waves. It's being done in lakes by people stand-up paddling, and maybe the wind comes up and they're doing a downwinder and riding waves. All of these pieces of surfing, this is the kind of thing that we're really focused on with surfing.com, the thing I'm doing today, is recognition of all of these different types of surfing. And, meeting a new group of people and just going, wow, the stuff you're doing is awesome. And they go, wow, that's really cool. It's nice of you to recognize us. So the spread of surfing globally, and, of course, because of, look what's happened in Munich with the ice back, with that river wave, and all of those people that have become surfers, and now they travel to France and Portugal and surf real waves in the ocean. They've got to learn those skills. There's a whole bunch of people, men and women sponsored by Rip Curl that are on that trip. And so this expansion of surfing as we know it is like astonishing. And so I get to meet people, and I'm fairly social, so I reach out to people, and became friends with this woman on the Russian stand-up paddle team. And she's never surfed, but I see her trying to ride waves in the Black Sea. And then I get connected with a guy that runs a surf camp in the Baltic through winter in Russia. And then the Russian surf team, and this is because of the Olympics, now there's a Russian surf team, they just went on a surf trip from Moscow to the Kuril Islands on the Pacific coast. That's immediately south of Kamchatka. The water was 32 degrees. And they're on an official Russian training mission there, for the Russian surf team. And so they're getting ready to travel down to the ISA event in El Salvador. I mean, the Russians, come on, please. This is sort of like a James Bond movie coming to life. And the really amazing thing in terms of recognizing all of these different types of surfing is that every one of them we can relate to each other. Because despite all of our differences, we have the one thing that we really love to do, and that's go surfing. So the idea that surfing has spread across the entire, I mean, please, a wave pool in Switzerland? How could it be? But it is. I mean, a huge wave pool in, South Korea. And so the idea that surfing has captured the imagination, just like it captured our imagination, I love the idea of being able to share it with other people. And remember the concept that where I grew up, I asked people to come surfing with me. Surfing to me has always been something you share with someone. And that now is to see it being spread. You wait till the best tube rider in the world comes from Namibia. He can't go right. That goofy footer will win the Pipe Masters. I mean, imagine those ideas. And there's probably some young kid there, African kid, just going, what if? What if? It's life-changing. And that's one of the amazing things about it.
Well, and I think there's a really nice parallel with what you're outlining with the project you're working on now, and obviously your approach to sharing surfing, but also what you talked about with even the founders group and even this exchange of ideas. The best ideas come out of people coming at things from a different perspective, even in terms of surfing. And you look at someone like a Kai Lenny, who's really a nexus point for all different types of wave riding, or you learn about someone like John Florence taking things he's learning from sailing and applying them to surfing, or Steph Gilmore even riding alternative equipment. And that's where you get the best kind of stuff. And I just think it makes a ton of sense.
It completely makes sense because we're in a time of fragmentation in the world. When you have something that brings people of different creeds and races and religions, brings them together, there's something really magical in that. We're out surfing this morning and some guy starts talking to Alyssa and it turns out he's from Brazil, not from the coast. He's from up near Paraguay. And but he's in Laguna Beach surfing. Like the community that we create, and this is a sort of a really, really important concept for all of us to understand, that for all of our differences, there's something that's just indelibly etched in our soul, is the love of surfing. And there's really great scientific reasons why we love the energy of the ocean and all of the healing effects of the ocean and all of these things. But it's this magical thing that we can it doesn't matter. Like I've surfed in the Great Lakes. I've surfed and to me, there's nothing I would rather do than go somewhere completely strange. I communicate with people on Instagram. This guy's trying to protect the right point break in Iceland from building a harbor there. Like, these are issues that we should all be on. Like, save the right point break in Iceland. The cool thing, you connect with people that are riding Mullimore and Eileen's in Ireland. Like, my great-great-grandfather, before he went to Australia, came from Northern Ireland. Like, I got family there. I would love to go and ride some of those. Not Mullimore, thank you. But maybe Eileen's on a 8-foot day. But there's so many other great waves in the world that are connected to these incredible cultural experiences when you go and meet other people. And yet we can have different languages and we can have different, cultural backgrounds, but we can all be stoked that we're going surfing together. That's, to me, this high idea of connectivity and positivity. When I read some of my interviews when I was in my 20s, I'm kind of pretty appalled. Because in truth, I was a mad dog. And in a sense, I'm kind of Neanderthal now. But I firmly believe in this connection and the positive connection between all of us as surfers worldwide. And I believe in the concept of being thankful and gratitude for, like, I look back on my life and I just go, wow, who could imagine that, I could live this life? It's like mind-boggling. And so, I have kids and I just go, anything you dream, you can make happen. It's going to be ultra hard. And there's going to be roadblocks and barriers and all this sort of stuff. But you put your shoulder to the wheel and you never quit on your dreams. That's it.
I think that is a perfect thought to finish what I'm calling part one of infinity versions of the Ian Cairns lineup episodes, because as you said, we could talk for hours and hours. But before we go, we do have a final segment. It is the lightning round, which are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can. First question. If you could only have one board set up for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad, bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
Single fin.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
I'm reading Dean Koontz right now. And it's elsewhere, and it's sort of like alternate universes. And I just read Custer. And I read Custer because of Larry McMurtry just died. Lonesome Dove, and also Last Picture Show. Mm-hmm. I love to read, and then I'm going to historical fiction's my deal. So I always have all of this sort of variety of things going on. I've got 2 or 3 up there on my bedside table ready to go.
That's a good answer. Best surf film ever?
Hot Generation. Animal. And Nat Young.
Yeah.
Bells Beach. Close second is Morning of the Earth, because of the soundtrack. Just the music just is so perfectly, that whole country style of the thing and cruising. It was a really epic time for the shift in Australian surfing.
One wave you never have to go back to?
Never have to go back to. A crappy left-hander. There's got to be plenty of them. So, you know what? There's nowhere that I wouldn't like to go back to be honest. Because the evolution of my thinking as I get older, I would find something really cool about it.
I love that answer. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life?
People from Western Australia will blow their mind. Hazawui. Hazawui is this kids' break inside of South Point in Coaramup Bay. North Point is like unbelievable. But in the winter storms in Western Australia, when it's howling onshore and it goes west, Hazawui takes on this whole different vibe. It keeps on moving further out and further, and it's got this big wedgy peak. And when the wind is 50 knots and it's raining and it's 12 to 15 feet and you're out there by yourself, it's Haleiwa. That's where I trained for Haleiwa. Hazawui.
Best person to share a lineup with?
My wife.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Sean Thompson in the free ride days, man. He owned every wave. Every wave.
Last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by
seeing my kids succeed.
Ian Cairns, thank you very much for what I am, again, calling the first of many episodes on the lineup. Where can people check out some of the work you're doing that you mentioned before? Surfing.com?
Surfing.com. We're producing a travel show called World of Waves that you can see on NBC Sports, Bally Sports, and also at your local. Just check your listings. It has about an audience of about 1 million people. It goes to places, and we talk about the place, but we meet interesting people. There's always interesting people. And you can find episodes on surfing.com, and you can stream them there.
Perfect. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you soon, both on the podcast and in the Founders Group.
Absolutely. It's been really a pleasure. Thank you so much for your work behind the scenes in advocating for the history and for the founders. I think it's really important for the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kanga.
Thank you, Dave.